In the late 90s and early 2000s, arguably the biggest wrestler in WWE was The Rock. The Brahma Bull electrified audiences with his charisma, incredible mic skills, and his millions of catchphrases. Right around the time The Rock left WWE, someone else was getting ready to be the next big wrestling star, and his name was John Cena. While The Rock was making movies, Cena was taking over WWE and becoming the new face of the company. This naturally led to fans wondering what would happen if these two WWE icons had a match, and on April 1st, 2012, they got to witness just that. Before we get to that though, we need to start at the beginning. After nearly 7 years since his last appearance in WWE, The Rock made a surprise return and was going to be the host of WrestleMania 27. The Great One went on to give a speech thanking the fans and psyching them up for WrestleMania. It was all the typical stuff you'd expect, until The Rock took a shot at John Cena.
Your bright green shirt, before that your bright orange shirt, you're running around here looking like a big fat bowl of Fruity Pebbles.
The Brahma Bull also added that he would see Cena at WrestleMania 27, and now the shots had been officially fired. John Cena would respond the next week. Cena poked fun at The Rock, and this began a series of verbal battles between the two. Each week, in the lead up to WrestleMania 27, Rock and Cena would make fun of each other. This created some memorable moments, like The Rock talking to the kid Cena.
Oh no, look, I don't have any toilet paper, but I have the next best thing to toilet paper.
During this time, Rock only appeared via satellite, which was something John Cena made sure to mock him for. This back and forth battle got so heated that it began to overshadow the actual main event of WrestleMania 27, which was The Miz vs. John Cena. Finally though, on the Raw before WrestleMania, The Rock and John Cena would meet face to face in the ring. The confrontation started off unusual, as Cena said he was happy to see The Rock back and even complimented him. However, things eventually got serious and ended with The Rock and John Cena ready to fight. Before a single fist could be thrown, the WWE Champion, The Miz, interrupted. Accompanied by his assistant, Alex Riley, the two ambushed the Great One. Rocky managed to fight back and take care of them, only to be given an attitude adjustment by John Cena. The first strike had been hit in the battle between The Rock and John Cena. Little did Cena know, but this attack would cost him big. In the main event of WrestleMania 27, The Miz defended his WWE Championship against John Cena. During the battle, both men went over the barricade and couldn't make it back to the ring, resulting in a double countout. Using his authority as guest host, The Rock restarted the match, but that's not all he did. The Great One made it a no disqualification match, allowing him to get revenge on Cena by hitting him with a rock bottom. The Miz took advantage and pinned John Cena to retain the WWE Championship. The next night, Cena had his focus on one man, and he called him out. The Rock came to the ring, and Cena issued a proposal, a match between two generations, The Rock vs. John Cena. The Great One upped the stakes and said the only place big enough was the main event of next year's WrestleMania, WrestleMania 28. The men shook hands, but were immediately attacked by the Core. The intruders tried to steal the spotlight, but they were no match for The Rock and John Cena. No one knew it then, but this wasn't the last time Rock and Cena would have to team up. Months after agreeing to face The Rock at WrestleMania 28, John Cena found himself in a handicap match against The Miz and R-Truth. The two intentionally got themselves disqualified and attacked Cena. The interim general manager of Raw, John Laurinaitis, broke up the fight and said that Cena deserved a rematch. Laurinaitis added that the rematch would be at Survivor Series with a partner of John Cena's choosing. Cena's choice?
The Rock!
The next week, The Rock appeared via satellite to answer Cena's request. Despite their past, The Rock agreed to be John Cena's tag team partner. Cena would later clarify that he chose The Rock not because they were friends, but because he was the only one who could defeat The Miz in truth. The Rock and Cena's partnership was rocky, to say the least. It got even worse on the Raw before Survivor Series, when the two started taking jabs at each other. To make it even worse, the night ended with The Rock upstaging John Cena, putting into question if they could actually win at Survivor Series. We got that answer 6 days later at the pay-per-view, where The Rock wrestled his first match in over 7 years. While The Miz and R-Truth were a well-oiled machine, The Rock and John Cena clearly had issues with one another. This put the match in jeopardy, as Miz and Truth came close to winning multiple times. The tide finally turned when John Cena, who had been isolated from Rock, was able to make the tag. The Rock laid the smackdown and picked up the win. As soon as the match was over, Cena and Rock's alliance ended too, as the Great One rock-bottomed his WrestleMania opponent. After the post-match assault, the People's Champ would disappear from WWE for a while. Once 2012 arrived, fans started to feel the rumblings of The Rock's return. Promo videos started being played on TV, and other wrestlers that John Cena was feuding with would mention the Brahma Bull.
He can't beat me, and he can't beat The Rock.
However, the rivalry really picked up on the Raw after the 2012 Elimination Chamber. John Cena stood in the ring and called out his WrestleMania rival and made a statement. Cena claimed that The Rock was no longer the People's Champion, and the only reason the Great One came back was to promote his movies. The leader of the C Nation also added that while The Rock was acting, John Cena was here in WWE every week. Cena concluded by saying that at WrestleMania 28, he wasn't just fighting for himself, but for everyone that ever dreamed of becoming a WWE superstar. The following week, The Rock made his first WWE appearance since Survivor Series. The most electrifying man in sports entertainment grabbed a mic and responded to what John Cena said. The Great One made it clear that The Rock wouldn't exist without WWE and the fans. Rock added that while John Cena was fighting for everyone who wanted to be a wrestler, The Rock was fighting for the fans. The fans who were tired of having John Cena shoved down their throats. While The Rock was saying this, John Cena decided to come out and get an up-close look. Cena called the Brahma Bull self-centered and egotistical and wouldn't care if WWE closed its doors tomorrow. He also called out The Rock for having notes written on his hand. John Cena soon left the ring, and while The Rock would say a bit more, it was clear that Cena had won that battle. To combat this defeat, The Rock would do a series of segments on the next episode of Raw called The Rock's History Lessons. Using American history, the Great One said the Rock Revolution had begun, while also being sure to mock his WrestleMania opponent. In addition to that, The Rock and John Cena met face to face again in the ring. The Great One made the point that everything Cena had spent 10 years competing in WWE for was on the line at WrestleMania. If John Cena lost to The Rock, then Cena would lose everything. Cena agreed, but despite all that, he still did not fear the Brahma Bull, and he was more ready than ever to fight. The next week, John Cena and The Rock again took shots at one another, but with a musical twist. Cena brought back his Doctor of Thuganomics gimmick and performed a diss track on the Great One.
Could we please have a week where you don't come out here and choke? You may be G.I. Joe this summer, right now you're a G.I. joke.
Later that night, The Rock held a rock concert where he threw it all back at Cena, even calling adult John Cena fans virgins.
But you're a walking virgin and you're 42. Let's rock.
Both men continued their war of words for the next few weeks up until the last Raw before WrestleMania 28. At the end of the show, The Rock and Cena found themselves face to face again. The Rock gave some trash talk, but Cena had a different response. The Rock was a wrestler in the Attitude Era when it was cool to be a WWE star, while John Cena was around when it wasn't. Despite that, he beats the WWE drum and embraces being a WWE superstar. Cena added that no matter if The Rock wins or loses, he's gonna go back to making movies, while Cena's life is WWE. That's why he has to win, and why Cena won't allow a visitor to take that from him. The Rock took in everything John Cena said before responding. When the Great One spoke, he said that he wasn't a visitor. He built the house that John Cena lives in now. On a professional level, The Rock needs to beat John Cena to be considered the best of all time. On a personal level, Rock just doesn't like Cena. The time for talking had come to an end, and now it was time to fight. The stage couldn't be any bigger. Machine Gun Kelly performed Invincible, which led into John Cena's entrance, while Flo Rida performed Wild Ones that led into The Rock's. Once the introductions ended, it was time for the match to officially start. Rock and Cena locked up, with Cena winning the test of strength. The two had a second lockup, but this time, The Rock overpowered Cena. The match then became a back-and-forth battle, with both wrestlers mostly using holds to wear down the other. Things changed when John Cena sent The Rock falling to the outside, allowing John to get the advantage. While The Rock was eventually able to mount a comeback, Cena had already done a lot of damage. Since that didn't work, both men tried to get the tap-out win by busting out their signature submission moves. Of course, Cena and Rock had way too much pride to quit, so neither man submitted. The Rock suddenly had a spark and began connecting with his big moves, including the People's Elbow. Out of desperation, John Cena tried to roll up the People's Champion, but The Rock denied Cena the win. How Rock caught John Cena off guard with a rock bottom and put an end to the match in 1, 2, 3. While The Rock celebrated, knowing that he had been immortalized as one of the greatest, John Cena sat on the entrance ramp, realizing he had just lost the most important fight of his career. 10 years later, this rivalry is still awesome. The fact that it started over a year before the match actually happened made it feel grand and epic. Also, what the feud was actually built upon was fantastic. John Cena had valid points about The Rock leaving WWE for Hollywood and only appearing part-time, while Cena was there every week. On the other hand, The Rock playing into fans' hatred of John Cena was great, and all of it made the rivalry feel real. However, it is kind of ironic hearing John Cena criticize The Rock, considering that Cena ended up doing the same thing. Even though the once-in-a-lifetime slogan ended up being bullcrap, John Cena vs. The Rock at WrestleMania 28 did big numbers. It became the most bought WWE pay-per-view of all time, with over 1.3 million people paying to watch the event. The previous record holder was WrestleMania 23, and one of the big reasons for that was Vince McMahon vs. Donald Trump. Watch the story of that rivalry by hitting the video on screen.